the same thing.
That's fine with me. I was sort of helping facilitate, so I wish I had more time to take notes. So this will be good.
I just want, not everyone's familiar with the Facebook group. So I'm just gonna show everybody the Facebook group quickly. Let's see here. If I can share my screen. I'll show you. Everybody able to see? This is the group.
Look at that. Yeah.
So yeah, this is the group. I mean, it's not the biggest group, but it is growing. So I don't have any metrics to kind of see how it's doing compared to other groups, but it has grown. And so there's a couple things I want to do differently about this group. I just wanted to say that I've cut out I cut out all the spam. So I'm pretty aggressive about cutting out spam and anything that's trying to sell services, especially if I can't verify like the quality of it. And and we have group rules that I've set up about, let's see if I can get this. Yeah. So we have group like rules, and I got these rules from Amanda at the Eeny Meeny Mo Foundation, and she's got a great group that's doing really well and able to help a lot of people. So just some common sense rules that I got from her, like this group's not going to have advertising and spam. And I do block posts if people aren't going to be respectful. And so I just wanted to say that I'm also going to try to have information sessions with like quality vetted professionals that I can find on a regular basis to try to help get good information, because there is a big misinformation campaign associated with parental alienation. So yeah, just that's a little bit about our group, just so you kind of know what it's about. And I just wanted to share that. So that's about the group. And so most of the events that I plan, I'll also have an Eventbrite link so that other people, you don't have to be part of the group to come to our information sessions, but just so you know, this is where we're meeting and offering like peer support for the issue. All right, let's see if I can admit.
Does anyone have any idea how I can get in here?
It might just be a setting on your computer, but it's a little late for us to work out that. But we can hear you, and that's the most important thing, so we can get all your knowledge.
Okay, yeah, let's go.
Okay,
because I don't know. I only have two options, so I tried them both.
Okay.
I'm on an iPad, and the video thing is up on the top. If you touch the top of the screen, oh, there you are.
There you go.
I am. Okay.
Figured it out.
All good.
All right. So do you want to start?
How'd you
Let's
do
start.
it?
So we have a plan about how we're going to work this out. So I was going to have both of our professionals here talk a little bit, introduce themselves and talk about their work, and then kind of and then talk about. And we're also going to have a Q&A session that I'll be moderating. So if you can just raise your hand or just kind of
You see
like,
Jacob with that?
Yeah.
So and I'll call on you just so that
okay.
we're not interrupting anyone.
See the clothes Brad got on him?
Rose looks like a bomb.
Yeah.
Anyways, I was at the whipping and Brad holding in, so I went back out to the driving, and Brad, he's down thing, and I was doing this. Jacob's looking at me, like, I guess the Jacob was doing this, and Brad was like trying to adjust him. I was like this. Brad looked down, and I went like this back.
If you're not speaking, can everybody mute themselves while Christine and Gary are speaking in the meantime? Thank you. Okay, Christine, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So I come from a very different orientation than does Dr. Kneier. I am an anthropologist, and I call myself a reluctant expert because I got involved with parental alienation by unwittingly. And so I knew nothing about this problem until my husband, my second husband, was having trouble accessing his kids. And I knew that when I met him, and that problem just became worse over the 10 years that I was with him. So I was really stymied because I had actually been divorced before. So my first husband and I had two kids, and when we divorced, it was as amicable as a divorce can be. So our kids went back and forth, 1 week with him and 1 week with me. And so you can imagine with the second husband, when that wasn't the case, I couldn't understand it. So, this was very heartbreaking for him. And he would drive to Edmonton to try to see his kids, and he'd get to the house and they would be gone inexplicably, or they would cancel at the last minute. The story. I think a lot of you listeners right now are way too familiar with what I'm talking about. So that's how I got into this. And because I am an academic and I am an anthropologist, I study behavior and relationships from an evolutionary perspective. So I know well the importance of having parenting in a child's life and adequate parenting from as many caregivers as possible. And I know that Dr. Kneier and I are on the same page about that. So this is really all about trying to make sure that just because a relationship between parents ends, you are still married to your children for life. And that has to be maintained. So in the case where one parent is unhealthy mentally, then there need to be appropriate interventions in order to return that person, or perhaps for the first time, make them an adequate, or we sometimes say a good enough parent, so that they can be productive and capable. So the problem of parental alienation specifically is a campaign or process of denigration, and there's an intent. And the intent is to make the other parent pay for the dissolution of the relationship. Surprisingly, it doesn't matter who ended the relationship. So parents who become alienators are either coming from an orientation of revenge, so they feel that they have been wrongly treated by their ex, or increasingly they are supported and enabled, I would argue, by the family court system, which gives them real rewards for accessing as much custody time as possible. So that does not set up a dynamic for a fair and equitable solution to a problem. And the third and perhaps largest problem is mental illness on the part of the alienator. So I think that now the literature is very clear. We've got good, solid science about parental alienation and the cause of it, and what are appropriate interventions. We're getting to the stage where we can appropriately put in preventions. Those are things like changing legislation, providing adequate supports for alienators, because we don't want there to be targeted parents. The goal of my work is to, erase the phenomenon of a targeted parent. And the focus to date has been on the targeted parent. Not only that, there must be a problem with that person's parenting, but also that that parent needs apparently, endless mental health intervention, even though prior to their separation, these were capable, loving, and involved parents. So two terms that I'd like to bring up, and then I'll let Dr. Kneier speak. I shouldn't say let, but I'll be quiet for a minute. But I think the first one is Stockholm Syndrome, that in order to understand parental alienation, it is a counterintuitive process. So when a captor abducts someone, a child or adult, then it's hard to imagine that the person kidnapped would actually fall victim to aligning themselves with their captor. And yet we all know that's exactly what happens. That's cult behavior. And when someone is in a cult, the only solution is you remove them from the cult leader. And then they have the supports necessary in order to return to a healthy life. So the cult has to be stopped, and the second part is that this is psychological abuse of children. And in any other form of abuse, we take immediate action, because all of us here, and I would hope everyone, wants to make sure that abuse of children does not happen, whether that's maltreatment by neglect or actual physical or mental abuse. And so in this situation right now, we are blaming the victim,
Oh,
who is the targeted parent, which is doing no good at all, except perhaps even ramping up the alienation at the targeted parent's expense, and in the long term, at the child's expense, who is an unwitting participant in the parental alienation and eventually becomes willing once they have achieved.
I think, what is the actual goal of trying to get Kneier to say?
That's what I was thinking. What is it you want to? You mind?
So, sorry, I'll mute myself now for a minute.
He's going to speak.
Stockholm Syndrome.
So they can't hear you.
Dr. Kneier, did you get a chance yet to introduce yourself?
No.
It's not very well.
So I'm coming at this whole problem from a whole different frame of reference. I'm a clinical psychologist. I arrived in Calgary in 1974. I had a specialty in dealing with children because I did my internship at Harvard with the Children's Hospital in Boston. But I came here as a general clinical psychologist and established a private practice fairly soon. But because I was working with children and I soon was asked to deal with the issue of children and divorce. I did custody evaluations. I saw very quickly what was going on as families got into more and more conflict in the courts, and began to propose mediation in the late 1970s. This was before mediation was a movement, and it was quite a stretch. In the course of my clinical practice, my assessment practice, and my work as a family mediator for over 45 years now in Calgary, I've always operated as a clinical psychologist with an analytic and psychodynamic kind of orientation. And so when I began to be confronted with children who were having this reaction that I feel has been misleadingly named parental alienation, a name given by Dr. Gardner, who first wrote about it, I believe, in the early 1980s, maybe late 1970s. He saw it. He was a psychiatrist and not an analyst. He saw it as a matter of one parent alienating the affection of the child from the other parent.
Weekend went by really quickly.
Am I still on, or?
Yeah, if anybody has, if you could all mute while Gary and Christine are talking, I really appreciate it. If you could mute yourself, thank you. Go ahead, sorry, Gary.
Okay. He saw it as a matter, as Christine has mentioned, and there's a lot of merit to this, but I am looking at this through a different lens. I'm looking at it through the lens of a psychologist who's always been interested in the inner workings both of adults and of children. And so what I will present is a psychological take on this reaction that children are having to high conflict divorce. And in my view, if you look at it that way, you learn a lot of things, and most importantly, it leads to far more constructive approaches to treating the problem. Before I go on, you're going to notice that my take on it is very different from what Christine has said, and there's two reasons for that. First of all, the lens through which you look at any particular phenomenon or reaction is going to color what you see. And second of all, Christine is talking about a population that I have not been exposed to very much. I have some of what she says certainly fits some of the families I've seen. But the vast majority of families that I have seen where children are having this reaction and other reactions would not be described the way that Christine is describing the cases she's talking about. So whenever it's my turn, I will give you what I see looking through my lens at the minds and hearts of children who are suffering from this reaction that I call not parental alienation, but denial of attachment.
Could you go on then? It is your turn. Could you go on and explain then?
Yeah, well, yeah, when Christine and I talked, we thought that I would present my take first.
Okay.
It'll be a very psychological take, and then she has a wider view and a lot of research about that view.
Okay.
I have no research. What I'm saying is from somebody that's been in the trenches with these people in this war for a long, long time, trying to make sense of it.
Okay.
So we know that divorce impacts children. And well, we know that parents know that. In fact, if you talk to parents, they'll tell you that the hardest thing about divorce, as hard as it is for them, the hardest thing is the effect that they know that it's going to have or is having on their children. The way divorce impacts children depends on two things. First of all, the way the parents handle it. In other words, the way the parents guide the family from a married family to a good separated family. Depending on how they do that, you're going to get troubled children or children that make it through unscathed, and all grades in between. The other thing that determines how children react to divorce is their age and stage of development. So we're talking here about children's reaction to high conflict divorces. So that means we're dealing with divorcing or divorced parents who have failed to make the transition to a good separated family. In fact, their conflict with each other, their animosity toward each other, causes them to forget everything that it means to be a family. In psychological terms, we could say that the parents are having a denial of family reaction. They've forgotten about what it means to be a family. Marriages can and do come to an end, but as somebody's already mentioned, families do not. I think Christine said that, families are forever. So this reaction of a child refusing all contact and attachment to one parent and generating all kinds of allegations and negative attitudes and reports happens principally in adolescent children. In fact, I believe it requires adolescent development. So for me, we're talking about children from about 11 or 12 at the very youngest to 17 or 18. Children who are reacting to their parents' divorce and conflict between their parents that are younger than adolescents, you can describe their reactions better as switching reactions where they change dramatically, or transfer reactions where they react to the stress of trying to transfer between parents who are having a very tense or hostile atmosphere. So I take it that all of the listeners are pretty familiar with what this reaction looks like. I'll only go over it briefly. The child reports all sorts of offensive behavior. Most of all, refuses strenuously all contact and all communication, generates all kinds of allegations, sometimes really scary ones like sexual abuse or physical abuse. Says the parent doesn't care, and I never cared about the parent. The results of the child having this reaction are in general that the favored parent backs the child's reaction in the name of wanting to respect the child and care for the child, believing all the child's complaints and believing, of course, in the badness of the refused parent. And of course, they might often add that they had similar experiences with that bad parent who was a bad husband or wife. The refused parent is outraged, sad, desperate about losing the child, and of course, blames the favored parent, believing it is all caused by the attitudes and influence of the favored parent. So why does it happen? How do I explain that an adolescent child would find himself or herself reacting this way and totally doing away with any positive feelings or attachment to the refused parent? I believe that it comes inside the child from the way that children and humans in general are built. It comes from our architecture. We are a species that depends very heavily on what we call attachment, on bonding. We are a social species, and in fact, for children, their survival depends on this attachment and this bonding. Human children are dependent for a far longer time and far more than any other species on Earth. When we study the nature of attachment, what do we find? We find that children, and of course, adults too, we are designed to be attached to people that are attached to each other. It's inherently, instinctively stressful and anxious and tense to try to form a caring, loving, or friendly or good relationship with people who are bitter enemies, especially if their conflict is about you. And so in high conflict divorce families, we have children in general, but we're here talking about adolescent children who can't switch once they do transfer, because adolescent development has taken that ability away and has called upon them to form their own ideas and their own identity. We're asking them to find some way to navigate between parents that are blaming each other, arguing over truth, vilifying each other, very negative towards each other, and who have been in huge conflict for a long time, and often as not, were in fact one of the problems in the marriage was divergence over parenting the children. adolescent children do not have any instinctive way, and therapists do not have any way of re-engineering adolescent children to navigate such an atmosphere. But luckily, the human mind, we know, is very adept at generating psychological defenses to intolerably stressful or painful situations. Denial is a technical term, but it is one of the most primitive and these days the most popular. If you don't believe me, just look at Donald Trump. Denial is a very potent and pervasive psychological defense against emotional, psychological issues that have become painful, anxious, very difficult. And it seems clear to me, if you look at the nature of the reaction that these children have, that what their mind is doing is that it is denying its attachment. There is a real attachment, but that attachment needs to be denied. Why? Well, trying to love and stay attached to two people who are such bitter enemies becomes intolerably stressful at this stage of development. And so their mind, without asking the child, this happens automatically and unconsciously, their mind begins to deny its attachment by generating all sorts of the opposite of attachment. Doesn't care, bad, never did care, no good memories. You know how it goes. Now, I've looked at the reaction and it's very interesting. Almost always the child, remarkably, is free of any guilt or anguish or remorse about this reaction. I mean, the child's reporting dreadful things and dreadful experience that would tear your heart apart. But no, it's as if some part of the child's mind knows that it's not really real. It's not really a choice that they're making. In other words, it's a reaction that is protecting the child from experiencing an attachment to one parent. Because the minute that is felt, the child's back in the doo-doo. How do you be loyal to two people who are in such conflict? Another characteristic is that the child can't remember any good times with the alienated parent. And if such evidence is adduced, you show pictures, you play tapes, you do all kinds of things, it does not dent the child's stance. The child will simply ignore that. Sometimes the child, this is really strange, the child will complain that that parent never cared anyway. The parent did this and did that. And if you're treating a child like that, you have them in your office and you say, oh, that sounds quite sad. You really, seems like you really do wish that there could be some caring or something good happen between you and that parent. Doesn't fit. They totally ignore that. They change the subject. They turn away from it as if to show us that their mind cannot allow itself to begin to remember or feel or experience any positive attachment. So if this is true, and I believe it is, if this is indeed an unconsciously generated psychological reaction that represents a real and serious disturbance inside the child, we could begin to approach it as such. That would mean that we would not be so busy. Now, in the cases that Christine has mentioned, what I'm saying probably doesn't apply. But in the cases, the majority of cases that I've had for so many years now, it does apply. We could get away from trying to decide which parent caused this, who's at fault. We could get away from arguing whether this is parental alienation or realistic estrangement. If we accepted that it was a result of the conflict between the parents, a result of the attachment repertoire inside of the child not having any way to deal with trying to stay attached to two people that are such enemies, such that a real attachment to one parent needed to be denied, needed to be kind of switched into the opposite, that's a pretty serious disturbance. If we saw it that way, we would be trying to get the parents away from blaming each other or arguing about what's true or what's not true. We would say, wait a minute, you know, you're a family. And in this family, we have a child absolutely, apparently rejecting one parent. If we frame this as a choice, we are making the child into a parent betrayer. And every parent knows how they would feel if they were ever in the position of having children that were arguing so much, they had to choose to keep one child and send the other child away. What would that do to you? Or if somebody came along and told the child, listen, you can't have both of us. Someone came along and told the parent, you can't have both your children. One's got to go, pick one. I mean, the Nazis actually did this as a matter of torture. Any parent forced to make that kind of a decision is in terrible shape. And so my view of what's happening to these children is that they're having a denial reaction, and we need to protect them from seeing it as a choice. We need to see it as an illness they've got and an illness that needs to be treated. It's crucial. That would relieve the favored parent from getting worried about getting blamed for it. It would help the refused parent to stop blaming the favored parent, and both of them would then need to cooperate to help the child out of this terrible reaction. The really telling thing for me is that when I've done this, and when I get the favored parent convinced and seeing, as some do, some need a lot of convincing, but when they see it for what it is and begin to support and endorse and even require access, and I get the rejected parent to be ever so patient and not arguing with the child, not blaming, not making it a matter of choice, offering the child an easy way out. Even when you do all of that, I gotta tell you, this reaction inside the child's mind is extremely powerful. And it's very powerful for, again, very good psychological reasons. The child had this reaction, it wasn't really a choice. If we make it a choice, and if we change the whole situation, which of course we want to do, and the child's mind were to reverse itself, I mean, that would be devastating. How can you have done such dramatic things as accuse your own father, blast your own father, refuse your own father, generate all kinds of negative allegations and attitudes about your own father. How can you just reverse that and say, oh, I guess that was all a mistake? No, it takes a lot of help and a lot of work to help a child to get out of this. The final thing I have to say is that if we accept this framing of the problem, that it's a serious psychological disturbance in the child, and we look at the many cases that need to go to court, the court is in a real bind. And so is a lawyer that we would appoint for the child. And so is a therapist that we would appoint for a child. All child advocates want to support the frame of reference of the child, the feelings of the child. The symptom fools all of us. It looks like a choice, and the teenager will fight tooth and nail that it's a choice. But if we permit it to be a choice, look what we're doing to the child. So if it is not a choice and it's truly a psychological disturbance, when it goes to court, the court then, knowing that, could get away from the two processes that it depends on the most. What do courts depend on? Finding out who's responsible, who's to blame here, and finding out what the truth is. What are the facts? Well, those are the two processes in the parental conflict that tend to cause this reaction in the first place. So all that the court thing does usually is amplify the parental conflict and therefore harden the child's reaction. If the court began to relate to this as the child has a psychological cancer, or the child has a blood disease, and the child and the favored parent are adamant about not going to treatment, what would the court do? The court wouldn't sit there and have a big argument about, well, you know, this parent probably caused the cancer, and if we could only, you know, get that to stick, then we'd solve this problem. No, the kid's got cancer. The kid needs treatment, and the court wouldn't go there. The court would say, listen, I'm not so interested right now in all of your allegations and all of this evidence and all this stuff that you're bringing up. This child's in trouble. We have a diagnosis. It's got a denial of attachment disorder, and it needs to be treated. And if the child had cancer and you refuse chemotherapy, I think we know what we would do. And if they were to begin to take that kind of an attitude, I think it might help. And of course, I could go on about the difficulties that therapists are in, or the lawyer for the child, but I think that gives you the flavor of a purely psychological perspective that looks at not the sociology, not all the other factors involved, but what is going on inside the child's mind and heart and psychology. So,
Great. Christine, do you have anything to add, or do you want to speak?
Sure. Yeah, so I was listening intently, and I totally agree with the child and the importance of healthy children and so on. So maybe just starting with the children, and of course, I'm not a mental health expert, but I am a researcher, and I have reviewed very closely hundreds of cases, both in the US and Canada, a study that I am looking at now. And I do have some good news to report, which is that family law, for the most part in North America, is now paying attention. And so I am seeing more cases that have had to go to court, which I believe they, ideally they would not end up in courts in the first place. But the judges are getting it because they're seeing it all the time. And they are making, or they have been making, directives that do not work, such as parenting plans. And so parenting plans only work if both parties are cooperative. And so from the point of where we have a severely distressed child, I think where Dr. Kneier and my paths start to diverge is that I don't believe the child, the child has a cancer which is preventable, whereas a lot of cancers aren't preventable. And the child is really not the problem. The child is the outcome of the problem. And so the child ends up with a cancer. And I agree there that it's, because of what's happening with that child's parents. But treating the child is, I would like to see it never get to that stage. So now to just turn it a little bit to my research, yes, we know that in about 87% of separations / divorces, they are as amicable as possible. So in that case, there are plenty of ex-partners who absolutely hate each other. They can't even look at each other. So they adopt a program of parenting, which is called parallel parenting. And that may even mean that they've got a third party who transitions the children from one parent to another to make sure that the child has more or less equal time and influence from both parents. And that enables the child to sort of figure out for itself that both parents, love him or her. And that's all a child should have to worry about, is that child is receiving as much love as is possible in the universe. So if we then look at high conflict divorce, which is the other 13%, I totally agree with what Dr. Kneier is saying. In high conflict divorce, there's parents that will bicker till the ends of the earth, and that has to stop, So that's where you need things like parenting plans that are enforceable and actually are enforced early on. And you need default equal parenting from the point of separation so that there is no conflict about who gets the kids and when. I mean, these are not the realm of child decisions that are appropriate. The kids should never have to think about that. So in those high conflict situations, I think Dr. Knier's got all kinds of really good ideas and lots of experience about what works. I'm talking about parental alienation specifically. I never, stray out of my lane. I'm only about parental alienation, which is a small part of what are sometimes called high conflict divorces. The uniqueness of parental alienation, though, is that it is counterintuitive because you only have one parent who is uncooperative. The other parent has the ability to, is diplomatic with the other parent, is cooperative, tends to be quite passive in order to placate the controlling parent in order to see their children. And they will, I know of a case right now where upon splitting, the dad in this case, he'd go to his ex-wife's house and pick up the dog poo in the backyard because then he could see the kids. So like when there are those kinds of really bizarre blurring of boundaries between what is an intact relationship and what is a separated one, the kids are already confused. So, right from the start, in terms of prevention, there has to be a mechanism in place so that parents know that should the relationship end, it still means their child gets more or less 50-50 time with each parent, assuming that both parents are healthy people who were cooperative, loving, capable prior to the divorce. So we are excluding, of course, real, violence, history of violence and those kinds of things. We're talking about where both parents are the good enough parents and were actively involved in their children's lives. And so why I'm saying 50-50 time, more or less, is because people these days have different work schedules. So, it may not be possible that it's 1 week on, 1 week off. But if you have that default, it's called the presumption of equal parenting that some countries like Sweden have already implemented, and their domestic violence rates have gone down because they actually found that a lot of initial domestic violence incidents happened after the couple's separation, not before. So if for everyone concerned about domestic violence, and I think that's all of us, I hope so, then if people know that no matter how horrible their married relationship is, they're still going to have this important relationship with their children, it's not in the children's, authority. They just know that they still have both parents. And I can tell you firsthand from my first relationship that, that's all my kids cared about. They said, what happens with daddy? Do we still see daddy? When do we see you? They wanted to know that we had a plan. And we were lucky because it wasn't high conflict. So in cases of parental alienation, just to distinguish them now, if anyone here is not sure, am I a victim of a high conflict situation? Am I a perpetrator of a high conflict situation? Or is this a case of parental alienation? Then ask yourself, are you a parent who does everything in your power to make sure that your children also have a loving relationship with the other parent, no matter how you feel about that other parent? That's how you figure it out from the parent's point of view. So some things that differ from high conflict. High conflict, of course, involves two adversarial parties. In a parental alienation situation, you don't have arguing. You have one parent who is cooperative, as I said. You have another controlling, probably narcissistic or cluster B personality parent who wants revenge, wants money, or just wants to destroy the other parent. And that is their entire goal. And they will sacrifice. I've seen these cases, these are legal cases where one parent is out to destroy the other parent and they don't care what that takes. And sometimes that involves using the kids to get there. If it's alienation, using the kids could include murder. Let's be very clear about this. This is not high conflict and battling between the parents. This is one parent terrified for the survival of their children at the hands of the other parent. Now, that may sound really awful, because it is. This is the most awful thing that I could have ever imagined, and I would have never chosen this line of research. And now I've been in it 15 years. I've looked at hundreds of cases. I belong to the Parental Alienation Study Group, which involves 133 countries now, all of them experiencing parental alienation, separate from high conflict. And how do we know these are alienation cases from the point of view of the kids? There are some symptoms that are not shared with other high conflict cases. Dr. Kneier talked about switching. In parental alienation cases, there is no switching. So the child switches once and stays there. And so if they are with the other parent in the early days of alienation, what we call mild alienation, there may be some switching when the child is spending some time away from their controlling parent, the alienator, and they may start to enjoy their time with the targeted parent. However, and I've seen this again firsthand, when they get near the time when they are to reunite with the alienator, the parent they are enmeshed with, pathologically enmeshed with, this is not a healthy affection. This is one parent controlling the behavior of their child at all cost. Then the child starts to revert and the switch goes back to the favored parent, and they start to badmouth the parent that they're with and so on, because they don't want to have to go, they're resentful that that parent can't do anything to stop the situation from occurring. And that just becomes more entrenched over time, and eventually they don't switch at all. And that's why I said they are at first unwitting victims, and eventually they become willing victims as the Stockholm Syndrome progresses. So they become increasingly solid. And that's why it's so important that mental health professionals recognize the signs. So in a child of alienation, there is a lack of ambivalence. One parent is all good, one parent is all bad. And as I said, in the early stages, that can switch a little bit, especially if it's, the separation is quite new. But I've even seen mild cases of alienation occurring in intact marriages. This is where, mom rolls her eyes every time the kids are doing something with dad, because, the idea that, well, dad doesn't know what he's doing. And that's reinforced by media that portrays men as being stupid or incapable or lesser parents. And that's flipped around if you look at alienated parents who are women. They are often portrayed by the father as being almost childlike, helpless, mentally ill, and so when the child hears those things or even sees the body language of a parent who is portraying their other parent, their other half in that way, they soon pick up on it and they think, well, maybe there's something to this. Maybe mom isn't capable. Maybe dad is a flake, and so over time that just becomes increasingly entrenched. So how do we look for cases that, for instance, in Dr. Kneier's practice, how do you separate high conflict from this very specific and counterintuitive dynamic? One of the ways that you can do that is you look for a child that looks to one parent consistently when they're answering questions. So the therapist is asking them how they feel about something, and they're looking to their coach, the alienator, for the correct thing they're supposed to say. They will use vocabulary that is more advanced than should be for their age. And this does not occur just in adolescence. In fact, by the time they reach adolescence, it's usually a moderate to severe case where the relationship with the parent is forever, gone, and they may never reunite. Or if they do, it may be decades later. So I've seen 5-year-old kids who say that they hate their mom and that, she's only my bio mom. Don't even talk about her. I belong to, and they'll name their stepmom. And they'll call stepmom mom, and they will call their original parent, their bio parent, by her or his first name. That's a classic kind of red flag to it. What else can I tell you? But the enmeshment, I think, is the key one. So if the child shows that they are, they talk about their preferred parent, favored parent, or what I call the alienator, if they call that parent, their best friend, this is the parent who I could not live without. This is the parent that makes sure that I'm going to have a good life, or protects me from the world, or keeps me safe. Those are also red flags, because a healthy child believes both parents are safe and are their safe place. And so when you see an imbalanced dynamic of any kind, then that should be a real focus on the real problem here. And if one parent is doing everything in their power, and this is what I'm seeing in the courts are telling the parents, you're going to have this parenting plan, and then one parent continues to ignore it. For example, sometimes it's held in contempt and continues on with that behavior, or even ramps up the alienation, then clearly that parent is not mentally healthy. Because if so, they would be putting their children's needs first. So I'll finish with just saying alienators are unable to put their children's needs first. And so we have to have a family law system and legislation that makes sure that the child knows both parents, has time with both parents, and if one of those parents is a potential alienator, intervention may happen, but we're hoping for prevention. If there's a potential for alienation, it's a volatile relationship at the point of splitting, then anybody involved in that family has a duty to report that to what I would call a triage system that would then see all members of the family together and separate and find out whether in fact these people are going to be able to manage a default 50-50 or shared parenting program, and then monitors that family to make sure that's happening so that it's never put on the child to try to figure the mess out. I have spoken with teachers and teaching unions, and they see this all the time. And they say, you know, if you see a child who's troubled, is truant, is substance abuse, is depressed, is anxious, the first place to go is the parents. What's going on there? But parents don't know, or teachers don't know where to get help. You know, where are the supports? And I myself am a university teacher, and I have been for almost 30 years now. And my own students in every class tell me, there's a student in every class who tells me, thank you. Sometimes they're crying, sometimes they slam the door, sometimes they come back to me once the course is over, and they say, thank you so much for showing me that I'm not flawed, that something bad happened to me and it shouldn't have happened. And that this is really about encouraging love from both parents. It doesn't mean you sway your allegiance to the other parent and hate them because they were an alienator due to their mental illness. Instead, it's about allowing love from both sides, and it's about not enabling, but empowering young people who have unresolved cases of alienation to reach out and find that parent who they thought was a deadbeat, who they thought was horrible, and to decide for themselves upon meeting and upon allowing that other parent to, explain what happened from their point of view. And then they've got all the information. But sadly, we have a crisis in society of young adults with anxiety and depression. And probably the majority of those can be traced back to some kind of situation that is either high conflict or is parental alienation. And that does have to stop. And on that, Gary and I are absolutely in agreement that, the children should never have to choose, and the children above all need to be healthy. And the only way to do that is for them to have two healthy parents.
Thank you so much, Christine and Gary. That was amazing. We've got a couple of questions I want in the chat here. I was wondering if you guys could take a look at them. Gary or Christine, can you comment on the use and importance of a parenting coordinator when one or both of the parents cannot cooperate when problems or misunderstandings arise? That's in the chat. And I don't know if there's a couple other ones here. I don't know, you can take a look. What steps can the erased parent take to gain back their kids when the child starts to reject them? And I think those are the two questions that we have.
I can answer a couple of those, and then not sure if Dr. Kneier wants to add those, because as I said, I mean, really my expertise is in how the process works, okay, how the dynamic evolves, and then what do the courts do when they see these cases. So I can tell you now, and really thanks to the studies that we're now undertaking and also recent research, there's a big a tome really that just came out earlier this year that is called Parental Alienation, Science and Law. And it's a compilation of all the contemporary researchers in parental alienation. And it's solid science, you guys.
So where is this? Where is this that we can look?
It's called, I've got it here. Can you hang on? I'll show you the book if you like. Can you see that one?
Just a little bit lower. Parental Alienation, what does it say? Parental Alienation, Science and Law. So that's a book, and who wrote it? William Bernet Demosthenes Lorandos. Okay.
Yeah, so both of them are mental health experts. Dr. Burnett is sort of the leading authority as a psychiatrist on parental alienation, has been working in parental alienation for decades. So I would really recommend that book because it is a compilation. They're the editors Demos is also a mental health expert and a retired judge, I believe, or lawyer. So they are the editors of this. So all of this is solid science, and will give you really what you need, the arsenal you need, let's face it, if you have to go to court. Now, back to the questions. So these are important questions about parenting coordinators, because when my second husband and I were forced to go to court because, the 3 stepdaughters I had were not doing well, even though they lived with their mother, and this was a parental alienation case. So they had a healthy father, but he wasn't even allowed to parent. He never could access his kids. On paper, he was an equal parent, but he couldn't access because the other parent prevented the access. So we wanted a parent coordinator, and it never happened. The other thing that happened was, there'd be a different judge every time you went to court. So you'd get a new court order, but if you've got an alienator, that person's not going to cooperate anyway. So there was no follow through to contempt and real penalties and mental health supports for the person who was the alienator. Today, I can happily tell you that getting a parenting coordinator is an excellent idea. I would really encourage you to do so, and to make sure that person has a solid commitment to your case. Secondly, it is fair that you can ask to have the same judge, and sometimes that is the parenting coordinator, is usually not, but the judge will be the case manager who will continue to see your case through. So that's important too. So you need a parenting coordinator, and you need one judge who knows your case, and I might add, is qualified. Because I have seen a number of cases, fewer since 2017 in Canada, but many cases before that, where the judge was, someone who usually adjudicates labor cases, or even in 2 cases, criminal cases. So I don't know if they just couldn't find judges that day or what was going on. So those things have improved. Now, the next question, the erased parent to gain back their kids. Now, this is the most heartbreaking and horrendous one, because you as the targeted parent know that even when you tell your family, they will often tell you things like, well, you must have done something wrong. And if you did something wrong in order to destroy that relationship, or in order to make things difficult for your ex, well, then it's not parental alienation. Then it's high conflict. So remember that I'm only talking about parental alienation. And in those cases, then we do have an erased parent, or a parent who's being actively erased. And so, of course, the obvious thing to do is to try to keep contact in any way you can. But having said that, I know that that can be literally impossible, and yet you will have mental health interventions that tell you that you're a bad parent and you should have tried harder to contact your kids, or that you are a deadbeat because you walked away. Some parents walk away because they think that it's better for the child to be with one parent than to deal with them constantly trying to work through the courts to see their child. But you know what? We have research from 2018, good solid research from the States, showing that even in cases where a child is in conflict because the parents are actively arguing and fighting, and it's a terribly adversarial relationship, the child is still better off seeing both of those parents, even though they're in conflict, than if the child is removed from one parent by parental alienation. And here's why that makes sense. If you think about, if a child's one parent dies, the child can still have an extended family on both sides. The child can still talk about that parent who died. That child can still love that parent. If it's an alienation case, the child may not talk about that, or will suffer consequences with the alienator. Rewards are only given if the child aligns with that enmeshed parent. And there's real punishment if they don't. This is abuse. And so what you can do to gain your child back, it really depends on many factors, which we don't have time to go into, but I'll mention a couple. One is the age of the child. And I can guarantee to you that if you go to court and your children are, say, 12, 14 years old, and you've only now decided that to get a lawyer and fight in court for access to your child, not fight your ex, but fight for, say, a parenting plan with enforcement so you can see your child, it's not going to happen. The judge is going to argue status quo and will say something that I'll never forget. This is an exact quote. Oh my goodness, it's been 7 years. It's far too late now to do anything. So what the judge said in that case was, it's better to leave the child with the abuser, even though they're jumping off a school building, not going to school, and drugged up so they don't fight back against that enmeshed parent, which is the case I'm thinking of. And someone online I know of already is familiar with a very similar case. In that situation, then it's not going to work for you. However, if your children are young, or if this is a recent separation, don't walk away. Never walk away, because it's your duty and your privilege to be in your child's life. Do not walk away. So if that means that you need to get a lawyer and you need to go to court and you've got the evidence and you've got, perhaps you've got someone involved who can monitor your home and the other parent's home or something like that, you've got evidence to show that you were an adequate parent, and that you want to continue to be so, and you have a duty to be so, you have a much better chance in court. And judges are hearing you. So this, as I said, is new, that judges are paying attention now. They are starting to see the difference between classic high conflict and parental alienation. And that's because they're looking for solid research, and it's now there. Let me just mention the rolling eyes one. Yeah, so that's a really good point, that it can seem insignificant, but it's something that healthy parents need to pay attention to, because sometimes when people do separate and divorce and they've got those, sometimes really adversarial feelings towards their ex, after all, they could not keep the relationship together. They really need to try to work hard at keeping even their body language positive whenever the other parent is in the conversation. So those are things that should also be counseled at the time of separation or beforehand, so that the child is never put in a position where they're wondering if one parent is actually competent or not. Okay.
Christine, can I give one question to Dr. Kneier? There's a question here, Dr. Kneier. What does Dr. Kneier think of Gardner and the symptoms? The eye symptoms, the 8 symptoms, 8 symptoms. Dr. Kneier, do you want to comment on that question? You turn your mic back on. Your mic's off. Dr. Kneier, you have to turn your microphone back on. You're muted. I'll ask to unmute.
I didn't know I was muted.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're muted.
No,
Go ahead.
I didn't understand the question. Am I on?
Yeah, you're on. Christine, do you understand the question? Maybe you can, I'm not sure if that's Gardner. There's a Gardner question. What does Dr. Kneier think of Gardner and the 8 symptoms of parental alienation? Do you know, are you aware?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go ahead then.
I think that Christine has made an all-important distinction between high conflict families and specifically parental alienation. We're talking about the same picture, the same reactions in the child, but she's talking about specifically parental alienation, which she has defined. And I'm talking about the same reaction in families that have not gone that far, where there isn't a really disordered parent who is bound and determined to turn a child against the other parent. Those are the high conflict cases that I'm talking about and that I've been dealing with. And I think that's a very important distinction. I'm very aware that there are cases such as Christine has talked about that I haven't been called upon to deal with. I've run into, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4, maybe more than that are really bad. But the vast majority of cases that I deal with are a refusal of access, a totally negative reaction to one parent, a denial of attachment to one parent, very dramatic, full of allegations and all of that, but without a disturbed or absolutely malicious favored parent. So the first question that was asked had to do with what can parent coordinators do to prevent a case from proceeding to this full-blown alienation. The other question was, what can a parent do as this process begins before it becomes a major alienation reaction? And I don't know if you want me to comment on those 2 questions
Sure, go ahead.
or not.
Please
Or
do. Yep, we have time.
okay. If the parents are in have a parent coordinator, which means they're meeting jointly about the reactions that their children are having and various parental differences they have about the children, that's the world I have lived in and would have a whole lot to say about. But very briefly, in general, what has been very effective for me is an ability of the parent coordinator or mediator counselor to decode the child's reactions on the one hand, and on the other, to have some feeling about what children need, developmentally at particular ages and general children's reactions. And what that decoding does is that it helps the parents get away from arguing about the child. I'm forever telling parents that any issue around which they diverge will get worse, and any issue around which they converge will get better. By that very fact, that's before we even address the issue. And so in general, I feel that if parent coordinators were able to help parents become aware that their conflict is a major driver of children's reactions, if the parent coordinator could help them realize that the issues that they are fighting over in such a heartfelt way are not as important for the child as their conflict is. They're fighting over things that will not, where there isn't as much at stake, will not have as much impact on the child as their argument well, and that therefore they can be permitted to think of compromises. They can think of other ways to address their child's needs and reactions. When it comes to parents who have come to me all through my career, where their child is beginning to have all kinds of reactions in a conflicted divorce, the other parent is not willing to come in for a joint session, which would be the most helpful. I always try to achieve that, but more than half the time, probably, the other parent's not willing to come in. Then I work with the parent, who's usually the better parent, in my view, at least the more insightful one, the one who sees what's happening for the child here. And I apply a general principle about human psychology, adult and child, which is that the human mind can make a good adjustment to almost anything it is up against, provided one thing, provided it can think about, know about, and talk about what is really happening. And so with these parents, I help them to do what I do with both parents as a parent coordinator. I help them to decode the child's reaction. I help them to see from the child's perspective what is going on, and to articulate that in such a way that they don't wind up criticizing or blaming or denigrating the other parent. I call it walking the razor's edge. I teach them to walk the razor's edge of staying with the child and what the child is experiencing, but helping the child to put words to it, helping the child to reflect on the difficulty the child's having and going back and forth between two homes, but the difficulty the child's having in getting very different messages. And all of that is an attempt to help the child's mind to be conscious of what's happening. Now, the parents who come to consult with me, the good parents, almost always have been in the business of whitewashing the whole thing because they don't want to make the error of saying anything bad about the other parent. And so they try to smooth over everything and talk about, how good the other parent is or how much the other parent loves them and all of that, when in fact there's real problems, and so I help the parent to walk the razor's edge so that the child can become more conscious of what's actually going on. And that can go a long way to preventing this automatic flip, this denial reaction, where their only salvation is to shut off their attachment to one parent. Anything else?
There was a question about what do you think of 8 symptoms of parental alienation? I don't know.
The 8 symptoms?
Yeah, Gardner and the 8 symptoms.
Well, I don't have them memorized, but
Okay.
all of the lists of symptoms that I've read in terms of how the child reacts, I haven't had any differences with that. It's pretty clear how the children how the children present themselves.
Okay.
If you're talking about the kind of research that Christine is up on about all of the psychological characteristics of malicious, truly alienating parents, I'm not up on that.
Okay. Well, we're almost out of time, so I'm just going to just show the Facebook group again so that you guys know where you can find more events. I'll see you guys did an excellent job. So I just want to say thank you so much to both of you. That was so helpful. And we did record the session today, so I'll be able to share all this knowledge that you told us. And hopefully we can have another session with both of you come back on because you're both extremely helpful. And I'm trying to, get people to come kind of come together on this page so that we can mobilize and see if all of us together can make the changes that need to happen so that we can see better health for the children. So I think everybody in the group is really happy to.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. That was very great.
Can I just jump in here just for 1 second?
Sure.
There were some questions that we didn't get a chance to
Okay, sure.
answer, and you're welcome to email me if you would like to, or pass them on to the host today, and she can forward them to me, because I would be glad to help in any way I can. Of course, my ability is limited based on the type of research that I do, but maybe point you to appropriate experts and so on. And Monique herself, who's the host today, she's very knowledgeable, and as is experts that are available and specialize in this area. So
Yes.
thanks, everyone.
Yeah, and I'd like to have a session with you guys again if we could. I think there's much more to talk about, but we only could do an hour and a half today, and I think that was pretty long. But thank you for bearing with us, and it was great having you both. I really appreciate you helping us.
Okay, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
You were amazing.
It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Okay, I'm just gonna share the screen, share my screen to show the group one more time. So yes, so we have this Facebook group. I don't know if you guys can see it. It is, can you see my screen? Let's see.
Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, this is, oh, for Pete's sake, it's not working. This is the group, and so it's growing fast. I don't have any metrics to compare to other groups, but as I've said, this group, I moderate it myself. I volunteer my time, and I am pretty aggressive about cutting out the spam and cutting out anything that I don't think is reliable, and trying to kind of create something here to create, and it's directed at the Canadian locality. So we do take Americans, but I'm trying to keep this localized to Canada. And like I said, I'm trying to mobilize people and mobilize information so that we can all come together and make the change. So we have ground rules that I based on the Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo Foundation in Australia. And she's excellent. I've been mentored by Amanda there. She's had a lot of experience moderating these types of groups for parental alienation. And so I've based all the rules for the group on what she's told me. And she's, like I said, very knowledgeable in helping me moderate. So like I said, the difference between this group and some other groups is that I erase the spam. There's no advertisements, and also other types of rules about respect. And I'm I try to be on it for protecting the children. So I don't have posts like if people post pictures of their children. We have safety rules for children as well. So yeah, so this is the group, and anybody in Canada is welcome. So please share. And thank you so much again, everybody. I really appreciate your time today, to our two experts, for donating your time.
Thanks, Monique.
All right, take care. Happy Sunday, everybody. We'll meet again.